May 18, 1992 Observer Newsletter, WCW hires Bill Watts, WrestleWar 92, SID and Warrior, AAA formation. By Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. May 18, 1992. In an announcement that came as a big shock to everyone, Turner Broadcasting announced Tuesday morning the hiring of Bill Watts as Vice President of Wrestling Operations. Watts' duties will be to take control of all aspects of the wrestling side of the business and will report directly to Bob Dhue. The Wrestling Executive Committee, Dusty Rhodes, Jim Barnett, Jim Ross, Tony Schiavone et al. Will all report directly to Watts. Kip Frye's role will become Vice President of Business Affairs for World Championship Wrestling with his main duties in the field on marketing, syndication, and media sales. Watts had a Tuesday morning meeting with the executive board and outlined some of his ideas to turn around the company's lagging house show business. Watts, 53, was a headline attraction as a pro wrestler from the early 1960s and worked regularly until the early 1980s and sporadically as late as 1986. He was a successful booker in many territories in the South and owner of the former Mid-South Sports Incorporated, which promoted in Louisiana, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Arkansas and parts of Texas. After an attempt to follow the lead of Vince McMahon and Jim Crockett to turn Mid-South Wrestling into a national company called the Universal Wrestling Federation failed, Watts sold his company to Crockett in 1987 and has been out of the wrestling business ever since. As a promoter, Watts was noted for producing award-winning television shows and drew many huge houses throughout the territory, particularly in 1984 when Bill Dundee was booking and Jim Duggan, Terry Taylor, The Rock, and Roll Express, Magnum TA, The Midnight Express, Steve Williams and Butch Reed were the headliner. Business fell off over the next few years, partially due to abysmal economic conditions in his region because of the decline of the oil business and partially because of changes within the wrestling business. What this means for the future is uncertain. Watts has a rep for being strong-willed and a perfectionist in getting across believable angles in building, developing and most importantly, getting over new talent. Those are aspects the company has been deficient at. Expect slow but noticeable changes at the top of the cards, but who and how is hard to predict. On the downside, Watts hasn't been involved day-to-day in pro wrestling since 1987, and this business is almost another world from the business that it was 5 years ago, which in many ways is a negative, but also a reality. There are concepts that worked and drew big money in the past that the reality of the times, heavy use of blood on television angles, for instance, no longer allows. The business is built on pay-per-views for the biggest money, but at the time same the group is still running full house show schedules and no doubt Watts' primary duty is to turn the house shows around. When Watts was having his successful house runs, pay-per-view didn't exist. Watts also has formidable national competition in Titan Sports, something that existed when he was running his territory, but for the most part Titan never drew big money in Watts cities while Watts was still running regularly. Watts was also always an autonomous leader, and now he'll be part of a corporate structure in a corporation which knows little about the nuances of the wrestling business. When Watts was producing those television shows, he was either putting together 1 hour or later 2 hours of television per week, which is much easier than trying to put together 6 hours. Watts' success, as his critics will point out, was in a 5-state area and some aspects of his promotion were regionally based. But that is forgetting Watts was very successful booking in other parts of the country and as a worker was a headliner in just about every part of the country at some point during his career. Over the short run, expect a lot of major changes both in talent and direction and in changing of structure. Over the long run, success or failure depends on how well some of the above questions are answered. The first in the series of big shows over the next 8 weeks, WrestleWar 92, takes place Sunday night in Jacksonville. It's the first of World Championship Wrestling's gamble at trying to put together 4 different major shows in a short time period. If that isn't enough, the attempt to hype so many events at once may be further confused by Titan Sports' attempt to sell a bodybuilding pay-per-view show next month, with one figuring the event will need more hype to be successful than any wrestling show thus far. Much, if not a majority of the hype will have to be on the wrestling telecasts since the bodybuilding show only airs on cable, and ratings are poor. There's not a lot to say about WrestleWar other than it is a classic one-match card. Whatever interest is there is in the War Games. What will make or break the show will be the War Games. The undercard is such that if it wasn't for War Games, it would be a bad house show. Generally speaking, War Games is the type of a match that is excellent live, but sometimes doesn't come across as well on television. It also guarantees time, which is needed from the main event on a show which, as of the last report, will only contain 7 matches to fill up nearly 3 hours. By virtue of the rules, War Games can go no less than 21 minutes and probably will go around 25. The remainder of the show has Rick and Scott Steiner in a non-title match against Takayuki Iizuka and Tatsumi Fujinami from Japan in a match to determine the number 1 contenders for the IWGP Tag Team title, currently held by Bam Bam Bigelow and Big Van Vader. Although Fujinami is a wrestling legend, he's no longer the super worker that he was for most of his career. As part of an angle in Japan, hasn't even wrestled in a few months, and while he has great ring knowledge, physically he just isn't there anymore. Iizuka is a very good mid-card talent for New Japan, will undoubtedly do the job, and will be the key to making the match. Brian Pillman vs. Tom Zenk for the light heavyweight title in a babyface match appears to be one of those feast or famine types. There are several questions. First off, traditionally face versus face matches don't get a lot of crowd reaction, although one can point to Pillman vs. Jushin Liger and Sting and Lex Luger vs. Steiner's matches on pay-per-view and note that face versus face matches are some of the most memorable matches of the past year. Pillman has yet to give his injured back a legit test, and Zenk hasn't been put in a position of late considering his opponents and placement on cards where he could give and will be expected to put on a top match. Freebirds vs. Greg Valentine and Taylor Made Man? If it's okay, it'll be a blessing. But I expect a long match, so if it's a bad one, it can be a showstopper. Junkyard Dog and Ron Simmons vs. Cactus Jack and Mr. Hughes? It's up to Cactus Jack. It could be okay. Scotty Flamingo vs. Marcus Bagwell? Johnny B. Bad vs. Tracy Smothers? And you have to figure most of these matches will be in the 10 to 15 minute range. About 1,400 tickets and $29,000 were sold for the live show in Jacksonville as of the middle of this week in a building which, given seats taken away for pay-per-view production, will probably seat around 7,000. It shouldn't be that difficult to paper the house where it'll look good on television, but it's not a good sign when WCW isn't able to fill up medium-sized buildings with paid fans in its most consistent city of the past 2 years for a pay-per-view show. It'll be an interesting test of the elasticity of loyalty of the WCW fans with how the buy rates hold up with the show this Sunday, followed by the Clash on June 16th. The Clash will have the opening round of the Tag Team Tournament, which will have to be co-pushed on television with the June 20th pay-per-view card. 2 major shows, not to mention house shows throughout June, being promoted simultaneously is likely to confuse some casual fans. And then they have to immediately start on the July 12th bash, still scheduled in Philadelphia at press time. On paper, all 3 of the shows in the future look better than Sunday's card, but whether they'll be successful from a marketing standpoint is something else. The bash, with its history and the apparent lineup, last 3 rounds of the tag tourney plus Sting vs. Big Van Vader, looks to be potentially the strongest WCW pay-per-view show of the year, but it'll be hard to sell it as something special with all the big shows preceding it. The Clash is the most intriguing. It should be a good action show. Since it is on television, viewers may tune in for curiosity since they aren't paying to see all these guys they've never seen or heard of before, but having that many wrestlers unfamiliar to the audience on a big show is a gamble since the company hasn't been successful in being able to introduce new talent and get them over on short notice. The Beach Blast looks to be the toughest sell since while Sting vs. Cactus Jack may be, the way it's set up, really entertaining, there's no logical build-up for a guy who has been pretty much forgotten of late to be facing the company's biggest star. They're almost going to have to shoot a major angle at the Clash to heat up the Terry Gordy and Steve Williams vs. China Brothers match, but that may be too late. So the brunt of the build-up and focus will be on the 30-minute whomever wins the most falls match with Rick Rude vs. Rick Steamboat. It's the strongest program the company has right now and on paper sounds like a very good match, but doesn't have much in the way of drawing power. Nor does anything else in the company right now, but this is the time period Kip Fry said he was expecting to see an improvement in interest during, and there's no signs of a turnaround evident nor even signs of momentum to begin a turnaround anywhere in sight. There are signs of some potentially good action, but it needs to be backed up by the ability to sell that good action. An update on the major stories from last week. Nothing official new concerning Sid Justice and the WWF. While those in the WWF are expecting Justice back at the end of his 6-week suspension, don't take that as any kind of a sure thing. Justice apparently isn't convinced about returning, at least at the present time, to the WWF. The betting line has it that Justice will take the summer off from wrestling, and return to whomever wants him the worst whenever he decides he wants to return. That is, if anyone wants him, although I'm sure someone will be willing to pay him big money and put him on top whenever he decides he wants to wrestle again. As reported here last week, Tokyo Sports has indicated he'll wind up with New Japan, which may be more likely than WCW, which at least publicly is seemingly not interested in bringing him in. Those who have talked with Justice are saying he's denied any problems having to do with reports of steroid test falsification that have been reported here and everywhere, and that his departure was entirely his own decision based on unhappiness with how the program with Ultimate Warrior was going. Contrary to reports elsewhere, there doesn't appear to be any evidence that Justice at any time has been asked to do a job for Warrior. There are a lot more details available about the promotional split-up of the EMLL in Mexico, which employs more wrestlers and runs more live events than any known wrestling promotion in the world. The split, which had been planned for months, officially was announced publicly this past Thursday, May 7th, at a press conference in Mexico City where Antonio Peña announced the creation of a new wrestling company, a la Asistencia Asesoría Administración, or AAA for short. Peña, who had resigned as vice president of the EMLL the previous week, which set up the public realization that this split was to occur, announced the signing of 32 wrestlers, and that the group's first live card will take place this coming Friday night in Veracruz, with follow-up shows on May 22nd in Querétaro and May 29th in Veracruz, and June and July Friday night dates in Lea, Puebla, Monterrey and Torreon already booked. The current schedule includes shows only on Friday nights in medium-sized arenas, 4,000 seats, and no live events within 50 miles of the wrestling hub of the country, Mexico City. This will be interesting since in Mexico most wrestlers work regularly, anywhere from 6 to 10 shows per week, since they do doubles and sometimes triple shots on the weekends. Peña, who is credited by many as the brains that put together the resurgence of the EMLL in recent years with the creation of new characters and upgrading of the television show, managed to sign many of the EMLL's champions and 3 of the country's biggest drawing cards: El Hijo del Sant, UWA welterweight champion, Octagon Mexican middleweight champion, and Conan, plus current CMLL world heavyweight champion Cien Caras, and his brothers Mascara Año 2000 and Universo 2000. In addition, on the heel side, he signed the 2 most respected workers in the promotion in Fuerza Guerrera and current CMLL middleweight champion Blue Panther. Of the top draws, EMLL has signed and will keep Atlantis, Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Canadian Vampire Casanova, among others. Other major names announced as working full-time for AAA will include all the midget wrestlers, including Mascara de Sagrada, CMLL World Mini Superstars champion, who have become a nice gimmick attraction not only in Mexico but have also been successfully booked into Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and Japan. At some point, Mascara de Sagrada and a few of the other top midgets will almost surely be booked with one of the 2 major U.S. companies as a gimmick attraction. Neither has plans to use them, but it's only inevitable that someone will see a tape and make arrangements. Also joining the new organization are Angel Azteca, Mascara Sagrada, Mexican light heavyweight champion, Fantasma Pero Aguayo and Justiciero as the biggest names. The remaining names announced were wrestlers who haven't worked for the major promotions in Mexico City. Some of the names are continuing to work for EMLL as of press time, but no word on how long that will be allowed to continue. Expect the EMLL to try to get the title belts off at least some of these wrestlers before they join the new office. So expect either a whole slew of quick title changes or simply a lot of titles being vacated on the EMLL side. Although Peña is said to have the better connections with Televisa, the network that broadcasts the television in Mexico, also on Galavision Cable in the United States, the current contract is with Paco Alonso, president of EMLL. Thus far, the network is broadcasting the EMLL Friday night cards from Arena Coliseo in Mexico City as if nothing has changed, although on the show that aired this past Sunday there were indications with a lot of the names of those who jumped in categories, midgets in particular, missing in the weekly television popularity poll. What is interesting politically is that Atlantis and Octagon recently teamed up to do a movie called La Revancha, which was a box office hit in Mexico, and that contracts were signed for a 5-movie deal with the 2 masked babyfaces in Televisine, a movie company run by Televisa, in co-starring roles. However, since they now work for rival companies, putting them together in the movie sounds hard, although Televisa would, it seem, want to promote a wrestling show which features the men they can do movie business with. Eddie Gilbert debuted on television Saturday afternoon in Memphis as GWF champion. Gilbert won't be returning to Dallas to defend the title, and it seems will work a title unification program starting in a few weeks in the USWA with Jerry Lawler, who naturally won the USWA title from Kimala on May 4th in Memphis. Longtime Columbus, Georgia wrestling promoter and former wrestler Fred Ward, who for many years was the 2nd vice president of the National Wrestling Alliance, died in his sleep this past Thursday night, May 7th, at his home. Ward, a longtime member of the NWA Board of Governors as well, which picked the NWA champion, had promoted pro wrestling in Columbus from 1953 until 1989. Ward also wrestled from the late 1930s through the mid-1950s under the name Pee Wee Ward, and worked as late as the early 1970s in coming out of retirement matches against managers like J.C. Dykes and Homer Odell. Ward, who was believed to have been 76 years old, his family refused to list his age, died of natural causes. He had been ill for some time, but not critically ill. His funeral was Saturday. Ward promoted weekly house shows in Macon, Georgia every Tuesday, Columbus, Georgia every Wednesday and Albany, Georgia every Thursday for the old Georgia Championship Wrestling office, with spot shows in towns in that area. He also produced his own live television show from 1962 to 1983 that aired every Saturday afternoon from Columbus that he'd run his towns off of. One of the legendary travel grinds for the wrestlers working the Georgia office was that they would tape the TBS 2 hours from 10 a.m. until noon every Saturday morning, then have to rush to Columbus to do the television show live in the late afternoon, then rush to wherever the house show in Georgia was for the Saturday Night Live car. Ward's program was among the last live wrestling shows in the country when it went off the air in the early 1980s. I believe only it in Memphis ran live television, which means many faux pas aired, including one night when Thunderbolt Patterson decried racist tactics of the wrestling company on live television in the late 1970s. It was also one of the last shows to be broadcast in black and white, as late as 1972 before it made the switch to color. He also promoted concerts and musicals, but concentrated almost exclusively on pro wrestling with some boxing after the 1960s. Ward was second vice president for the NWA from 1978 until around 1985. Ward's business of course had its ups and downs depending upon the talent climate and booking that was going on in Georgia at the time. His peak year was probably 1977 when his television show averaged a 42 rating and 76 share. Think about those numbers if you thought the general public had no interest in pro wrestling before 1984 and that the WWF's national expansion took the business out of obscurity. And headline feuds of Mr. Wrestling 2, Johnny Walker vs. Dick Slater and Ole Anderson vs. Stan Hansen drew weekly sellouts at the 5,300-seat Columbus Auditorium. In 1984, when Vince McMahon bought controlling interest in Georgia Championship Wrestling from Jack and Jerry Briscoe and thus gained control of the contract for pro wrestling on TBS, Ward bankrolled Championship Wrestling from Georgia Incorporated, which ran local shows and was run by Ole Anders. Those close to him said he realized at the time of the McMahon purchase that the wrestling business had just changed and was never going back to the way it was because McMahon had too much money for any small promoters to compete with him. It was reported here that the FMW show in Los Angeles and Tijuana had been canceled, which what was reported in Japan, but last word at press time is that the shows were scheduled. The card in Los Angeles is set for this coming Saturday night at the Cal State Los Angeles Gym and is a joint promotion with Benjamin Moore's WWA promotion and is scheduled to include several FMW wrestlers plus Negro Casas, Leo Del Santo, Enrique Vera, T. Nables Jr. and Sr. and Super Muñeco. Another correction from last week is that an indie card we listed on May 2nd in Tamaqua, Pennsylvania headlined by Bob Backlund vs. Paul Orndorff as being a UIU card was actually promoted by Wrestling Independent Network WIN. Two of the muscle magazines that just hit the newsstands had items relating to pro wrestling. The New Muscular Development, a straightforward middle-of-the-road publication, has a negative article on the steroid testosterone, talking about how simple it is to beat a steroid test using the various forms of testosterone since it clears the system quickly and listing ways to use the drug in conjunction with epitestosterone injections, and never having to fear getting caught in steroid test. The author, Dr. Michael Colgan, claimed temporary and even permanent impotence as a potential side effect from too much testosterone. In the underground, it is generally acknowledged using the wrong steroids can lower one's sperm count and make it difficult, sometimes impossible, to impregnate, but that the effect is temporary and the body goes back to normal upon cessation of the drug. Colgan stated the effect as sometimes permanent and said, "That's why some of the biggest names in bodybuilding and professional wrestling spend tens of thousands of dollars on specialist hormone treatment trying to get back their virility. That's the first I've ever heard of that, so I'm somewhat skeptical of it." In the same magazine, in a gossip article by former wrestler Don "Ripper" Savage Ross, when talking about the WBF's new steroid testing program, he claimed the program was developed because of media pressure after some former wrestlers turned crybabies sought revenge on their former boss. Ross also wrote, "Most WBF contestants I spoke to say they will comply with the tests and new rules. Some object to the knock on your door and test policy that they consider an invasion of privacy, along with a common complaint that they were told that they would not be tested when they signed their contracts, though the contracts state that testing may be done. The surprise announcement 3 months before the show won't give those on steroids a chance to build back up naturally by contest time, and most fear they'll be soft and small by show time." Muscle Mag International, the more gossipy-oriented magazine, had an interview with a supposed anonymous major steroid dealer, "We're starting to have an epidemic of this," who spoke about steroids, claiming of the thousands he dealt the drug to that nobody had ever had a bad side effect, and also talked about pro wrestler. He said pro wrestlers never get off the stuff and said people always complain about bodybuilders using steroids but never talk about how much testosterone Paul Orndorff, the name he uses. He also wrote, when talking about steroid use in various sports, that pro wrestlers never get off the stuff and claimed some of them testes the size of peas each, probably exaggerated. Yet another note in the same issue talked about the death of Buzz Sawyer. It was the second or third lead story in the gossip section, and a claim that certain WBF competitors' annual drug bill exceeded $100,000, and said some WWF wrestlers weren't far behind. That figure sounds high for bodybuilders, but I really wouldn't know, but I can't see any wrestler except for maybe one or two who could even afford a drug bill like that, and it doesn't sound plausible that of those few, that any of them are even heavy users. Steve Planament of the WWF made some interesting comments in Sunday's Charleston Post-Courier regarding the WWF steroid program as it related to possible drug-related suspensions of Sid Justice and Warlord. I'd love to say it's the steroid program working, but when I look at it objectively, then to me the suspensions, if they are drug-related, don't mean the program is working. The program will be working when we don't bust anybody because they're all off it. That might sound a little self-righteous, but when everybody's off it and everybody's healthy, that's when we can say we did it right. You can't go cold turkey because it can be very damaging to your health. That's why our whole system is not one of retribution. We're not pointing our fingers at anyone and saying, "We caught you now." It's the same philosophy as with Kerry Von Erich where he needed rehab. We sent him to the rehab to get well and come back to us. He looks much better. And that's the whole point. It's not to make accusations at people. It's to make healthier people. If someone goes astray, you want to bring them back to the fold and you want them helped. Look at the Warrior. I've looked in his eyes and his head was clear. He looks terrific. He's never looked or sounded better. He's healthy. He's rested. He's back in normal shape, and that's the whole point of this steroid testing and drug testing program. It's not to hang anybody out to dry. It's to help people out. Bulldog, for instance, in experiencing health problems with a thyroid condition. I'm not a doctor, but I would assume it's for steroid use. He's off everything, but he can't lose weight. So people are going around saying he's still on steroids, but he's not. He needs counseling. He needs people to come in and help him. We've put a lot into this business, and we plan on being here for a long, long time to come. And the only way to go about that is to have healthy people here. The only thing new on the Murray Hodgson lawsuit against Titan Sports is that Titan lawyer Jerry McDevitt was admitted by the Connecticut bar for the case this past Tuesday, according to Hodgson's lawyer Ed Nussbaum. While McDevitt has claimed to other reporters that the delay in the depositions was because Hodgson no-showed depositions, that it isn't the case because depositions couldn't have started at that point since McDevitt hadn't even been admitted by the Connecticut bar on the original late April deposition day. A new deposition date was scheduled for this coming week, although Titan received another postponement, and it won't be taking place. A correction from last week. We reported that Nussbaum had gotten an injunction keeping Titan from videotaping Hodgson's deposition, but in fact, Titan, at press time, will still be able to video Hodgson's deposition, but won't be allowed to edit the tape and release it to the press, although Titan is attempting to get that decision overruled this week. Favorite line of the week, Cactus Jack on Sunday's main event show when talking about JYD said that the only bones the Junkyard Dog is fit to chew on are past your prime ribs. WCW manager and pro wrestling legend Harley Race is currently involved in a civil suit concerning a boating accident in 1990. A short article by Joe Lamb in the Kansas City Star this past Wednesday reported on the trial opening on May 5 in Jackson County. The plaintiff, Brenda Willison's lawyer, stated in opening remarks that Race was drunk and reckless when he rammed his 23-foot boat into the plaintiff's 36-foot cabin cruiser. Race's lawyer claimed the former 7-time NWA champion may have had a few drinks, but he struck the cruiser at night only because it had no rear lights, and that Race should be considered a hero because he helped pull Willison and her husband to safety. Willison suffered broken bones in her back and shattered legs, and has been wheelchair-bound since the accident. Willison's lawyer, Jay Kirkrom, told jurors that Race's ex-wife, Yvonne, would be among his key witnesses, saying she had refused to ride in the boat with him that night because he was too drunk. He also said that Race shouted profanities at a police officer, shoved him, and refused to take a breath test for alcohol. Race's lawyer, James Schwinn, countered that Race and his wife have endured a bitter marriage and divorce, and the altercation with police came after Race had reached shore with a cut tongue and broken nose, and the officer walked up to him and accused him of being drunk. The trial of Race, who now has bleached blonde hair once again, continued for the rest of this past week and is expected to continue this week, as well, before being completed next week. Yvonne Race's testimony took place toward the latter part of this past week and, according to reporters, wasn't as damaging to Harley Race as expected. EMLL. May 1st at Arena Coliseo in Mexico City saw the Space Warriors, El Guerrero Maya and Guerrero del Futuro and Damian El Guerrero, beat Tigre Universitano and Aguilita Solitaria and Solarite 2 Stars, Dandy and El Jalisco and Angel Azteca beat Espectro Jr. and Espectro de Ultra Tumba and Bestia Salvaje in 2013 3-star. They are building toward a Dandy vs Salvaje hair match, which should be one of this group's best matches of the year, and main events saw Blue Panther and La Fiera and Kendo Nagasaki, from Japan, beat Ultimate Dragon and Mascara Sagrada and Love Machine when Panther pinned Love Machine with his feet on the ropes for leverage in the third fall 3-star. Dragon was said to have looked super here. This coming Sunday's television show, taped May 8th, has Atlantis and Apollo Dantes and Dragon vs Panther and Fiera and Nagasaki, Ringo Mendoza and Faraon and Ciclone Ramirez vs Gran Marcus Jr. and Angel Blanco Jr. and Felino and prelims. Looks like another weak card on paper. May 10th at Arena Coliseo had a tag team tournament with IGA and Koga, Ringo and Chashu Mendoza, Mano Negra and Leo del Solitario Kung Fu, and Kendo Nagasaki, El Egipcio and Javier Cruz, Satanas, and Sultan Gargola, Supremo I and Hombre Bala and Ciclone Ramirez and Aguila Solitari. The Mendoza brothers won, beating Cruz and Ike Paicio in the finals. UWA. No title changes of late. Los Cowboys, who will be working as the Silver Kings in the NWA Tag Team Tournament, retained their UWA Tag title, beating the Headhunters, same team as in the NWA Tournament, on April 24th in Netzahualcoyotl. The Cowboys vs Headhunters feud is said to have been very bloody and brutal by UWA standards. April 26th in Netzahualcoyotl saw the Killer keep the UWA Junior Heavyweight title, beating Enrique Vieira. April 28th in Querétaro saw Villano V keep the UWA Light Heavyweight title, beating Scorpio Jr. Andre the Giant is still around and headlined the May 10th card at El Torreo in Naucalpan for the fourth straight week. The card, advertised on Andre's final match at El Torreo, saw Buffalo Allen, Bad News Allen, and Coquina and Black Scorpio, Charles Skaggs aka Flying Scorpio with New Japan, who has tremendous potential, beat Connect and Andre and Villano Trace, with Scorpio pinning Connect in the third fall, so Scorpio is getting a big push. That was a weird pairing since Connect did a stretcher job for Andre the previous Sunday in another 6-man tag, and 2 nights earlier Connect worked on the heel side, teaming with Fishman and Killer against Andre and Villano Trace and Villano V. In the semifinal, Phil Layson, Phil LaFawn aka Dan Crawford, and Doug Furnace and Fishman beat Phantasma and Solar Eye and Gran Hamada. Layson and Furnace are billed as the Can-Am Express instead of the Canadian Express, as they had been billed up until the last week or so, since Furnace is from Tennessee. Andre has been packing them in, and this group has had a lot of box office problems of late. In fact, his first night in a few weeks ago, teaming with Bam Bam Bigelow and Rambo, drew 16,000 fans to the house that Connect built, El Torreo. The Can-Am Express on May 7th in Mexico City teamed with Negro Casas on top at Arena Pista Revolucion against Black Power Dos and Negro Navarro and Dr. Wagner Jr. in an all-heel matchup. In some of Andre's other matches, on May 9th in Cuernavaca, he teamed with Villano V and Connect against Can-Am Express and Casas. The new ratings came out with the top 10 contenders to heavyweight champion Dos Caras being in order: 1 Bam Bam Bigelow, 2 Connect, 3 Wagner Jr., 4 Mil Mascaras, 5 Scorpio Sr., 6 Andre, 7 Fishman, 8 Coquina, 9 Gigante Warrior, Butch Masters, 10 El Psicodelico. They must be in trouble in that division. Other names known to U.S. fans in the ratings in the other classes were Silver King at number 3 in the junior heavyweight behind Champ Killer, Headhunter A at number 6, Headhunter B at number 8, and Bull Payne, Rick Gantner, at number 9. In the light heavyweight division, Pegasus Kid, Chris Benoit, who holds the WWF title, is the number 1 contender for UWA champ Villano V. Canadian Tiger, Mike Lazansky, is rated number 1 for the vacant junior light heavyweight title. Jushin Liger is rated number 5 contender for the middleweight title held by Negro Casas. In the tag team ratings as contenders for the champs, Los Cowboys Headhunters are number 2 contenders, Coquina and Buffalo Allen are number 9, and American Eagles, Tony Anthony and Danny Davis, are number 10, while for trios behind champs the Death Missionaries, Miguelito Perez and Hurricane Castillo Jr. and Gigante Wari, who won't be back as a trio since Castillo jumped from the WWC, which has a working agreement with UWA, are number 4 the Hawaiian Beasts, Coquina and the Samoan SWAT team, Fatu and Samoan Savage, are number 5, Canadian Tiger and Los Cowboys are number 6. Japan. Very slow news week here since most of the major offices were off. All Japan opens its new tour on Saturday night, while New Japan opens its tour on Sunday night with one of its biggest cards of the year in Osaka. Announced matches are Riki Chashu vs Keiji Muto for the IWGP title, Antonio Inoki and Hiroshi Hashi vs Rambo, CWA champion in Europe, and Brad Rheingans, Big Van Vader vs Tony Halme, Jushin Liger vs Samurai for the IWGP junior title, Shinya Hashimoto vs Kevin Nash aka Vinny Vegas in WCW, Masachono vs Super Strong Machine, Tiger Mask, Koji Kanemoto vs Pegasus Kid and Akira Nagami vs Brad Armstrong. With capacity in Castle Hall at 14,000 and tickets priced at $156, $120, $78, $55, $39 and $23, a sellout gate would be in the $1 million range, which I believe would rank only behind the WrestleMania Live House in Indianapolis and the New Japan 3-1 show as the biggest Live House of the year thus far. It's something of a wrestling war since Pro Wrestling Fujiwara has a Friday night show in Osaka headlined by Yoshiaki Fujiwara vs former World Karate Association Cruiserweight champion Don Naki and Nielsen on top. Nielsen is the best boxer/kickboxer at working mixed matches with the pro wrestlers of all time and had a genuine legendary 1986 match with Akira Maeda that was considered the most successful mixed match in history and also excellent mixed matches, and was even put over Fujiwara and Keiichi Yamada. Jushin Liger. Expect Nielsen, who is no longer a major name in karate, to return the favor. Also Bart Vale vs Wayne Shamrock in the semifinal, Masakatsu Funaki vs Yusuke Fuke, Minoru Suzuki vs Kazuo Takahashi plus Jerry Flynn and Berto Duzel in prelims. Kabuki held a press conference and announced he wouldn't be going to FMW after all. Nothing official, but speculation is that it means Hachiro Tanaka isn't going to help FMW at present. Takashi Ishikawa is the current matchmaker for SWS. Brasso de Oro is the booker for Universal. The biggest show of the past week was the UWFI card on May 8 at the Yokohama Arena, which drew 14,000 fans, 3,000 shy of capacity, which drew its own mega gate with ringside tickets going for $156 to crown its first champion. Gary Albright, who with the possible exception of Steve Williams would be the toughest legit wrestler currently working pro style right now, became the first champion, winning via knockout over Nobuhiko Takada in 1437 after a series of suplexes. Also Kiyoshi Tamura, a young wrestler who has become one of the new favorites, got his mega push beating former WBC light heavyweight boxing champion Matthew Saad Muhammad in 34 seconds with a sleeper hold, while in the other major draw, former sumo wrestling grand champion and former New Japan and SWS wrestler Koji Kao debuted and knocked out Kazuo Yamazaki with the kick to the face in 7:48, with fans surprised at how well Kao adapted to this style. In other matches, in an exhibition, Billy Robinson went to a 10-minute draw with Nick Bockwinkel in a match with Lou Thez as referee. Before the match, Thez addressed the crowd and said that in the US the dominant promotion was the WWF and called their wrestling a circus, and praised the UWFI style and called it real pro wrestling, and what pro wrestling should be all about, or words to that effect. Yoji Angio beat Stephen Day, a member of the 1980 US Olympic team that boycotted the Moscow Games. Mark Fleming, a Lou Thez protege, made Yuki Miyato submit with a chicken wing in 8:07. Tatsuo Nakano made Tom Burton submit to a half crab in 9 minutes, and Mark Silv, billed as a national caliber U.S. amateur wrestler, went to a 30-minute draw with Masato Kakihara. Highlights of this card air on television in 2 weeks, which will be this group's first shot at television. FMW ran a major show on May 6 in Hyogo, drawing a sellout 5,011 fans to see the ring surrounded by fire barbed wire match, which lasted just 4:31 with no decision between Atsushi Onita and Tarzan Goto versus the Sheik and Sabu. Don't have all the details on the match, but apparently the ring caught on fire and Sheik was badly burned legit and had to leave the tour and return home for treatment. Also, Starman and Centurion and Horace Boulder beat Mr. Ganasuke and Shooter and Samba Asako. May 7th in Toyota drew 3,128 as Boulder, Mark Balia and Sabu won the WWA World Martial Arts Tag Team titles in a no-rope barbed wire match, beating Onita and Goto when Sabu pinned Onita plus Asako beat Centurion and Fuji beat Starman. All Japan Women on May 7th in Fujioka drew 1,800 as Bull Nakano beat Suzuka Minami and Asia Kong, and Bison Kimura and Miori Kamiya beat Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue and Mariko Yoshida. Esther and Cynthia Moreno started back with the group on this show and will be in for 2 months. Esther is probably the best non-Japanese woman worker in the world. It was Nakano's first match back after taking 3 weeks off after perhaps the most brutal women's match in history at WrestleMarine Piat against Asia Kong. They showed photos of Kong after the match and her face was swollen and her eye was shut, looking like George Foreman after his last fight. And Kong only missed a day or two, so you can imagine what it took to keep Nakano out of action for 3 weeks. Catching up on TV ratings, the April 20th All Japan Women show did only a 1.0 rating, April 25th New Japan did a 6.4 and April 26th All Japan did a 4.0. May 24th Universal card in Tokyo's Korakuen Hall has Gran Hamada vs Bulldog Punish KT Robin Hood, who is the younger brother of Booker Brasso de Oro and America, and Ciclone Ramirez versus Shuel Guerrero and Scorpio Jr. and El Engendro and Cooley Crush SC and Sakigaki Gantetsu versus Lightning Kid and Dynamic Lid, Jerry Lynn. Wing announced it will hold a tournament to decide the Wing Junior Heavyweight title starting June 4th with entrants Chaz Taylor, Grand Sheik, Arias Romero, Bill Dundee, Cheetah Kid, Ted Petty, and Jimmy Backlund, Jimmy Richland. Backlund is a big deal since he was an FMW regular, one of its best American workers and light heavyweight champ for the group in the past, so it looks like he's made the jump. Japan Television Rundown. April 18, New Japan. 1. Samurai Osamu Matsuda upset Jushin Liger in 1554. Samurai was more impressive than his reputation here, maybe because he was working with Liger. Both men did hot dives and the match was excellent with lots of big moves and near falls at the end. Samurai ripped up Liger's mask. Liger was going for a German suplex when Samurai kicked him low and pinned him with a Hurricane Rana. Similar to a Frankensteiner, except the guy who takes the move is standing still while the guy giving the move does a running leap. 4 stars. 2. Negro Casas pinned Eddie Guerrero with a dandy roll-up. Only the finish aired but both looked good. 3. Norio Oniga pinned Koji Kanemoto with a German suplex. What aired looked good. 4. Pegasus Kid pinned Flying Scorpio with a cradle. What aired looked just super. Scorpio is green but has a world of potential. 5. Tatsutoshi Goto and Hiro Saito beat Nagami and Takayuki Iizuka in 11:06 when Goto pinned Nagami with a back suplex. Fast-paced good action throughout with Iizuka really carrying things. 3.5 stars. 6. Super Strong Machine upset Masa Chono in 11:52. Solid work early and turned into a great match with a well-booked American style face versus heel finish. Chono had Machine in a submission when Saito jumped in and KO'd Chono with a beer bottle. Chono juiced and it looked like the finish when Machine did a diving headbutt off the top rope but Chono kicked out. The heat was super as Chono did a comeback and put on the STF. Saito jumped in with a beer bottle again but Chono cut him off and beat him to the punch, however Machine clotheslined him from behind and got the pin with a German suplex. After the match the Raging Staff, Machine, Goto, Oniga and Saito, brawled to the back with Chono. Really wild good stuff. 3.5 stars. 7. Chashu and Muto and Hashimoto beat Scott Norton and Tony Halme and Bad News Allen in 10:47 when Chashu made Allen submit with the Scorpion. Match was better than it sounds on paper because it was all constant action. Hashimoto actually can work good spots with Halme, who is the most green of the three and kind of stands out like a sore thumb in main events. But even with Hashimoto there were spots where they lost it. 2.5 stars. April 19, All Japan. 1. Dan Spivey pinned Kenta Kobashi. Only the finish aired but there was a lot of heat so they probably had a good match. Spivey won with a DDT. 2. Mitsuharu Misawa made Doug Furnace submit with a facelock. Hottest move was Furnace going for a Frankensteiner and Misawa turning it into a powerbomb. Misawa then did an elbow off the top rope which put Randy Savage to shame and got the submission. It looked good. 3. Jumbo Tsuruta pinned Masafuchi with a back suplex in 14:35. They traded stretching and submission moves back and forth. All the work was solid, but it was slow-paced and not exciting. 1.75 stars. 4. Stan Hansen pinned Toshiaki Kawada in 17:30. Both men work a very realistic style with stiff moves back and forth. This was an excellent and believable match. Hansen sells his role that of being the old, slightly out-of-shape guy just hanging on and getting pounded by the smaller, younger and faster guy, but always kicking out of the pins. Even though Hansen isn't the athlete he was years ago when he made his rep in Japan, his ability to adjust his work to the veteran trying to hang on to the top spot role keeps him effective on top. He's also really brutal the way he beats people up. Not pretty at all, but super. Hansen won with a lariat, of course. 4 stars. April 20th, All Japan Women. 1. Bull Nakano pinned Kyoko Inoue in a battle of world champions. Nakano holds the WWWA title and Inoue the IWA title. Match went 24-13, but only about 5 minutes on television. There were nice moves but it lacked the intensity you'd expect. 3.25 stars. 2. Toshio Yamada and Manami Toyota won the WWWA World Tag Team title and kept the UWA, Mexican, version of the same in a unification match with Asia Kong and Bison Kimura. Toyota pinned Kimura with a German suplex in the first fall in 11:12. Kong pinned Yamada with a powerbomb off the middle rope to even things at 9:57. Third fall was fantastic with one near fall after another that looked like the finish. Yamada pinned Kong when Yamada and Toyota gave Kong the most amazing double backward superplex with Kong landing on her head like the piledriver of the year in 1550. This is a must-see match and I'd rate it thus far as one of the 3 best matches of 1992, although it can't touch the Yamada and Toyota match with Suzuka Minami and Yumiko Hata. 4.5 stars. April 25th, New Japan. 1. Hiroshi Hashi and Nagame beat Scott Norton and Larry Cameron in 9:35. Norton did a great Superman gimmick in destroying Hashi and Nagame with unique Superman spots. Finish saw Norton hit Cameron with a lariat after Hashi moved and Hashi pinned Cameron after a knee drop off the top rope. 3.5 stars. 2. Liger pinned Oniga in 12:14. Liger powerbombed Oniga on a table and broke the table in two. Oniga juiced. Turned into a good match with Liger winning with the same Japanese rolling crotch finish that Pillman used to win the title from Liger at Super Brawl. 3.25 stars. 3. Samurai pinned Guerrero with a German suplex. Only finish aired. Guerrero looked good and Bout looked pretty good. 4. Casas pinned Pegasus Kid with a dandy roll-up. Looked good, but maybe not as spectacular as you'd figured given the talents of the two. 5. Chono beat Goto in a grudge match in 7:29. Mainly punches and kicks going back and forth. Goto tried to hit Chono with a beer bottle but Chono blocked it, and also reversed Goto's back suplex before putting him away with the STF. Average match but a very exciting finish. Machine and Saito ran in and beat on Chono until Chashu and Iizuka made the save. 2.25 stars. 6. Machine and Saito beat Chashu and Iizuka via DQ. The staff worked on Chashu with Iizuka getting the hot tag since they are trying to push him now. Iizuka ended up DQ'd for hitting the heels with chairs. Good grudge match. 3.5 stars. 7. Muto and Hashimoto beat Halme and Allen with Muto pinned Allen with a moonsault in 12:13. Some good action but when Halme was in, spots were really messed up. Muto's work made it average. 2 stars. April 26th, All Japan. 1. Hansen pinned Steve Williams in the match to determine who went to the finals of the Champion Carnival Tournament in 1915. Tough and stiff action but slow-paced. There was a lot of heat at the end for the last 4 minutes as Hansen was in trouble and ready to be pinned but he hung on and caught Williams with a lariat to the back of the head for the pin. 2.5 stars. 2. Misawa pinned Gordy with a crucifix in 17:25. Another must-see match. No incredible moves here, but both men sold so well for each other that it was a textbook brawl match with wrestling moves thrown in. Perfect psychology and execution from start to finish. 4.25 stars. April 28th, SWS. 1. Tatsumi Kitahara and Shinichi Nakano beat Shinriki and Yoshiaki Fujiwara in 14:55. This was Shinriki's retirement match, and he worked it like he was never going to work another match. It's kind of sad because Shinriki had potential to be a real cult favorite as a little guy in a big man's world, like he was in sumo, but he suffered so many injuries both in sumo and pro, that he couldn't last. Shinriki worked almost the entire match and worked the match of his career before Nakano pinned him with a Northern Light suplex. 4 stars. 2. El Satanico retained the NWA Light Heavyweight title beating Ultimate Dragon. This was Dragon's best match since joining SWS. It was almost perfect except the finishes ruined the heat. He did everything perfect until they did a double pin finish in just 7:05 which totally killed the crowd. It wasn't like the finish got heat, they just went dead. Both men restarted and Asai was so good he got the crowd back and ended up doing his moonsault to the floor, but missed, and was counted out in 3:08. The core finish on its own, because of how it was done since it came off realistic, wasn't bad although the crowd fully expected the title change. In combination with the double pin, doing a core of any kind just deflated the audience and ruined what would have been a 4-star plus match. 3.75 stars. 3. Naoki Sano retained the SWS Junior Heavyweight title pinning Chavo Guerrero in 12:20. Guerrero has clearly lost a step since his prime but shows remnants of what he once was. Sano has great physical talents and can do awesome things in the ring but doesn't work well with a wide variety of foes so I feel he's overrated by US fans. 2.25 stars. 4. Natural Powers Yoshiaki Yatsu and King Haku regained the SWS Tag Team titles beating Natural Disasters, Earthquake John Tenta and Typhoon, in 6:38. There was a lot of heat when Haku, who everyone in Japan knows is a tough guy, was in with Tenta, since they are reputed to be two of the legit toughest men in the business and the fans know. But Typhoon was just terrible, is he ever anything else? Yatsu pinned Typhoon. This was much better than any natural disasters match I've seen, but still a pretty bad match. 1 star. 5. Genichiro Tenryu won 2 of 3 falls from Ric Flair in the Battle of Kings Match 2. Flair was over huge and the fans were really into the match. It was your typical Flair match with Tenryu being a better opponent than Flair has had in a long time, but not as good as Tenryu would have been a few years back. Flair won the first fall by pin with the figure 4 in 10:21. Tenryu won the second fall with a powerbomb after an Enzuigiri in 4:09. Third fall saw all the typical Flair spots. Flair really put on a show. Tenryu won with the powerbomb again in 6:50. 3 1/2 stars. USWA. May 4th in Memphis saw Dirty White Girl Kim beat Nurse Cratchit, the Power Twins beat Larry Arch and Kat Garrett, Psycho beat Tony Anthony in a loser leaves town match, the Man of the 90s beat Tony Falk in a match where the winner would get the loser's valet for 1 week, Lauren Davenport beat Miss Jennifer in a street fight, Big Black Dog beat Moon Dog Spot via DQ, Ryan Christopher beat Tom Pritchard to regain the held-up Southern title, Jeff Jarrett and Charlie Trapper, formerly J.R. Hogg, beat Moondog Spike and Cujo via DQ, so the Moondogs keep the USWA tag team titles, and Jerry Lawler pinned Kemal, surprise surprise, to regain the USWA title. Lawler was attacked before the match by the Moondogs and given 2 piledrivers, but he summoned his awesome magical powers and came back and still won the title because, as he said on his interview Saturday, he waited for Kimala to make his fatal mistake. Actually, his fatal mistake, as far as the USWA title was concerned, was made a week earlier. Eric Embry returns this week. During a Moondogs television match there was a jobber named Trade Keller, honest, and they gave him the most awesome board shot in recent wrestling history. Eddie Marlin, who in the storyline is suspended as promoter since he hit Brian Christopher a few weeks back with a foreign object, is now managing Lawler and Jarrett in their feud with the Moondogs. Guy Coffey, who has handled the concession table for a long time, is acting as the promoter on television, and is doing a subtle heel promoter gimmick. In the middle of the television show, Eddie Gilbert showed up and they acted like he wasn't supposed to be there and that he didn't work for the USWA. He had his GWF North American title and said he wanted a title unification match with Jerry Lawler. Guy Coffey wanted to call security to get him off the show since he wasn't supposed to be there. Marlin came out and said that's exactly what Gilbert wants because he can then go back to the GWF and say that the USWA didn't have the guts to let him in, and it would make their promotion's open-door policy a farce. Coffey told Marlin that he wasn't the promoter and that Marlin was suspended. Tom Pritchard then came out and said in the USWA the GWF belt means nothing and that he can't just walk in and become the #1 contender. It wound up with them agreeing to a match, and if Gilbert wins, and with Pritchard just a few weeks away from leaving for Smoky Mountain, you know what happened, and Pritchard agreeing that if Gilbert beats him, he'll admit Gilbert deserves a shot at Lawler's belt. Kim said she's trying to start a petition and ask fans to write letters to the television station to get Tony Anthony reinstated because she said it took 3 people to beat him on Monday night. May 11th in Memphis has Psycho vs. Arch, Power Twins vs. Garrett and Ricky Hayes, Man of 90s vs. Falk, with the loser having to be the winner's servant for 1 week, Kim vs. Cratchit, Trapper vs. Richard Lee in a boxing match, Christopher vs. Rex Hargrove, a former offensive guard at Memphis State University making his debut, Embry vs. Spot, Gilbert defends against Pritchard and Moondogs defend against Lawler and Jarrett. Hargrove and Christopher had a television altercation where Christopher insulted the Memphis State football team and Hargrove came out and they brawled until Christopher ran away. Christopher is becoming an amazing early career Jerry Lawler-like heel. Even though for technical wrestling, obviously there's nothing there, the Lawler and Jarrett vs. Moondogs matches with all the gimmicks and wildness are probably the most consistently entertaining series of matches in the country, and it's really revitalized what looked to be a dying territory. Global. May 8th at the Dallas Sportatorium drew 319 fans for 3 hours of television taping. The first hour, for a May 21st air date on ESPN, had Brave Sky and Nakona, Chris and Mark Youngblood, beat Dogs of War, Mike Morrow and Buster Fowler, Iceman King Parsons returned and pinned Jeff Gredler, Johnny Mantel pinned Johnny Hodges, Barry Young and Stephen Dane beat Chaz Taylor and Jimmy James, and Terry Sims drew with Billy Joe Trava. For May 28th on ESPN saw Scott Putski beat Maniac Mike Davis, via DQ when Davis hit the ref, Bill Irwin pinned Mike Blackheart, Mike Morrow and Mantel attacked Irwin after the match, and Young and Dane kept the GWF Tag Team titles beating Brave Sky and Nakona via DQ when John Tatum and Rod Price interfere. The third hour, which will air sometime in late May on ESPN, saw Sims pin Buster Blackheart, Buster Fowler, The Connection, Tatum and Price, over Gredler and Hodges, and Irwin beat Mantel via DQ in a match that lasted an interminable 26 minutes. Even with all of what happened 2 weeks ago, the promotion advertised Eddie Gilbert to defend the North American title and actually expected he'd be there, even though he made it clear he wasn't coming back. Anyway, they announced before the final match of the card, which was scheduled to be Gilbert defending against Mantell, that Gilbert's plane was late, and that Mantell had drawn a bye in his quest to win the title, so I guess that means they'll be holding a tournament that Mantell will probably win, since he surely would have won the title had Gilbert shown up, as the promotion actually for some reason expected he would. At one point during the match the crowd chanted, "We want Eddie," but not for long. Danny Davis and Big Bad John also no-showed, so figure Davis as GWF light heavyweight title is down the tubes as well. Only match announced for May 15th is Dane and Young versus The Connection. Bill Irwin was pitching road shows on television. Oregon. The word this week is that C.W. Bergstrom didn't win the Pacific Northwest title and that Ron Harris is still the champion, because in the match a few weeks back, it wasn't signed for a title match. Anyway, in Portland, they don't even acknowledge any of this is going on, or in fact, who the champions even are. May 9th show in Portland drew around 100 fans as Ron and Don Harris went to a double pin with Al Madrill and Mike Miller in a battle of heel teams. Neither team plays face in this feud. After the match, everyone on the card ran in to separate the teams and then brawled aimlessly to set up a bunkhouse battle royal for next week's main event, which is a kids-free night, so the crowd should be up. Also, Brickhouse Brown drew Mike Winner, Bart Sawyer beat Moondog Moretti via DQ, and after the match Steve Dahl ran in after Moretti dropped Sawyer astraddle the top rope. Jesse Barr pinned Rambo and Dahl pinned Moretti, who subbed for Buddy Rose. They are still running as many as 5 shows per week, even though most shows draw 75 to 100 fans. Here and there. The Philadelphia Daily News ran a column about Joel Goodhart last week. It was a very good story and seemed very factual, with Goodhart explaining his problem, which is what everyone said all along, was that he was trying to put on cards that he wanted to see and thus overbooked talent and kept deficit spending. He claimed to have lost $130,000 in the 2+ years he was promoting wrestling, $95,000 of which was his own money. Carol Lindsay and Dan Overstreet booked a show in Atlanta advertising Mill Mascaras. In the poster they had a fat guy with a mask pretending to be Mascaras, but of course Mascaras no-showed since he insists on a hefty guarantee plus trans, which would wind up being way more than the gate could possibly be. Interesting to see the Pro Wrestling Illustrated family of magazines report on the Donahue Show and overall WWF scandals in recent issues. Even though their relations with the WWF are probably as good as they've been in years, since Bill Apter has always been friends with J.J. Dillon, the stories were not at all apologetic or favorable to the WWF. If anything, they, while not strongly, painted the McMahon position as being dishonest. Herb Abrams is telling people he'll be promoting shows in the Carolinas. Henry Hubbard ran 2 shows in the St. Louis area. On May 2nd in Jefferson City, Missouri, he drew 75 fans for a show which included Kimala, Chris Adams, Ron Powers, Kevin Von Erich, Rufus Jones, Mike George, and Butch Reed. Same crew on May 3rd at a junior high in St. Louis drew 850 fans. Buck Robley's next television taping will be June 9th. WWC on May 9th in Bayamon, Puerto Rico saw Alex Exotico beat Randy Rhodes, Louisiana Tigresa double countout, Sasha Louisiana Lay beat Abdullah Hussein, Lou Fabiano via DQ, Pia News beat Dick Murdoch via countout, Heartbreaker Adonis and Fidel Sierra beat El Bronco No. 1 and Cyclone Salvadorine, Miguelito Perez pinned Ron Garvin, Ron Starr and Doug Masters kept the WWC Tag Team titles, beating Rex King and Ricky Santana via DQ, and the main event saw Carlitos Colon go to a double countout with Invader No. 1, Jose Gonzalez, in a match with 2 referees. It appears that Invader inevitably will be the one to make the heel turn. May 8th in Jayo, Puerto Rico saw Hussein beat Rockin' Rebel, King and Santana beat Exotico and Joe Don Smith, News pinned Adonis, Garvin drew Colon, Starr and Masters beat Bronco No. 1 and Salvadorino, Perez pinned Murdoch, Perez pinned Smith and Santana beat Sierra in a pole match. Leigh Thornton, Russian Brute, Heijo Khan, Eric Spraxia, Ron Slinker, Motor City Madman and Skull Mason are among those who appeared on a Moss W show on May 6th in Baltimore. Wayne out of Baltimore will be holding a singles title tournament with the first round, 4 matches, on June 14th, semifinals on July 19th and finals on August 16th, all at the Baltimore Sports Bar. Chris Love's first Championship Wrestling from Texas show drew 379 fans at Fair Park in Dallas, Texas, with Marty Jannetty pinning Billy Joe Travis in a top-notch main event. Also, California stud Rod Price pinned Sean Stevens, Stephen Dane pinned Jeff Gaylord, Tom Powers won the group's light heavyweight title from Mad Dog Billy and Chaz, and Tug Taylor double countout with PYTs, Eric Fontaine and Dwayne McCulloch aka Awesome Kong, plus prelims. Next show is scheduled at the same location on June 13th, and the plan is to run weekly shows starting in July or August. Interesting that headlining the June 13th show will be the Patriot, Del Wilkes, who was the closest thing to a national star that the old GWF was able to create. Patriot vs. Travis, Playboy Vince Apollo managed by Freddie Fargo vs. Dane, Taylors vs. PYTs, Stud vs. Scott Braddock, Sean Stevens vs. Steve Simpson. This group in its program talked of Jerry Lawler as world champion and claims it'll be bringing in outside talent. Big D Pro Wrestling drew 95 fans on May 10th in Dallas as Stevens beat Tatum via DQ and Travis beat Stud via DQ, plus Gary Young pinned Action Jackson and Parsons pinned Dane, and Jimmy James beat Mr. Outrageous, Ray Evans. Billy Travis is running a show on May 16th in Terrell, Texas with Tatum and Stud vs. Young and Dane for what is billed as the World Tag Team title, Chris Adams vs. Travis, Irwin vs. Mantell, Terry Sims vs. Skander Akbar. Freddie Fargo has a show on May 28th in San Angelo, Texas with Tatum and Stud vs. Dane and Young managed by Fargo, Sims vs. Sam Houston, Chaz Taylor vs. Stevens, Tug Taylor vs. The Stomper, Gary Vines, Women and a Battle Royal. Lightning Kid vs. Mickey Doyle and White Lightning vs. Man Mountain Lancaster headline May 30th in Fraser, Michigan for Motor City Wrestling. Gator Belong ran a show on April 25th in Naples, Florida, drawing 575 fans with Bugsy McGraw and Abdullah Farouk Jr. Killer Kowalski's IWF had a show on May 3rd in Billerica, Massachusetts, headlined by Jimmy Snuka beating Hercules to win the Canadian-American title, and Nikolai Volkov beat Mike Sharp with Kowalski as ref. Rio Lord of the Jungle beat Vince Apollo and Misty Blue Sims beat Cat LaRue, plus Midgets Little Louie beat Tiger Jackson, and Richard Byrne beat Chris Duff. Ya drew and announced 477 in New Berlin, Wisconsin as Wave Riders beat Trevor Heartbreaker Adonis and Texas Hangman on Top. Sunflower State Wrestling had an outdoor show in the street on April 25th headlined by the Panther winning a Battle Royal, and April 26th in Hoisington, Kansas drew 48 as Lightning Lenny beat Master Ninja on Top. Gary Jackson and Ron McFarlane worked underneath. Tom Reeder had a show in Coffeyville, Kansas on April 24th drawing 180 headlined by Jim Neidhart pinning the Barbarian, formerly of WWF. Gordon Scozzari is planning on reopening his AWF in June or July using the following names: Son Star, Paul Roma, Sunny Beach, Jeff Gaylord, Mike Sharp, Pez Watley, Stan Lane, Jim Cornette, Don Morocco, Tony Atlas, Pat Tanaka, Aki Malumba, Paul Orndorff, as champion, TNT from Puerto Rico, Juan Rivera, Nikolai Volkov, the Pitbulls, Johnny Hotbody, Sabu, and Manny Fernandez. 1 star. Those on this list may be reading their names for the first time, since at least 2 people on the list had no idea Scozzari was starting up nor had been contacted in months about working any dates for him. Peter Scott from England is said to be the booker. Tony Rumble is in charge of television. The promotion is also trying to find Tully Blanchard and Dennis Condrey to bring them in. Jerry Gray ran a show on May 2nd in Jasper, Florida, which drew 190 fans headlined by Gray and Bugsy McGraw. Jalisco Promotions in Los Angeles on May 10th drew 375 fans as Vandal Drummond, former newsletter editor Kurt Brown's first main event, putting his hair up against the mask of Gemini Kid, who lost and was revealed as Eric Anderson. Main event saw Superboy and Al Murrieta and Tornado Negro Das beat Captain Oro and Piloto Suicida and Piloto Nuclear. WWF. Business remains weak for the third weekend. I don't believe there were any cancellations, but there were no houses to brag about. British Bulldog and Chris Walker have been suspended, presumably for 6 weeks each. Jim Duggan is replacing Bulldog for the foreseeable future. Lex Luger was announced on the WWF television show as being guest poser for the WBF event, and they announced Ultimate Warrior, Bret Hart, and Legion of Doom as appearing as well. Kerry Von Erich was pulled from the road for unspecified reasons but isn't suspended and has been doing PR work over the past few weeks. He's scheduled to return to action on Friday in Houston. Some of the suspensions may be related to Dr. Mauro Di Pasquale taking over the steroid program from Dr. Anthony Daly at the beginning of this month. If Di Pasquale can really catch all users, as he claims, expect a few obvious names to be added to the list. And if not, well, there's no such thing as an unbeatable drug test. Primetime Wrestling on May 4th did a 2.4 rating, All-American on May 3rd did a 2.3, and Body Stars on May 2nd did an 0.6. May 8th in Orlando drew 2,800 as the Genius pinned Jim Brunzel 1/2 of 1 star. Nasty Boys beat Owen Hart and Jem Powers 2 1/4 stars. Duggan beat Repo Man via DQ -5 stars star. Ultimate Warrior pinned Papa Shango in 4 minutes 1 star. Warrior got a big pop coming out, but the match had no heat at all once the bell sounded. Rick Martel pinned Tito Santana dud, Bret Hart pinned Shawn Michaels 2 stars, and Legion of Doom beat Beverly Brothers 1 3/4 stars. This week on Family Feud has a contingent of WWF heel wrestlers against a team of WBF bodybuilders. May 9th in Tampa, Drew 2800 as Genius pinned Brunzel, Duggan beat Repo Man via DQ, Nasty Boys beat Owen Hart and Jim Powers, Warrior pinned Shango, Martel pinned Santana, Bret Hart pinned Michaels, Legion of Doom beat Beverly Brothers. Even though Warrior vs. Shango is the main event on these shows, these are really Warrior vs. Sid Justice houses because most of the advertising listed that match as the main event. Warrior Shango angle runs next week, so it really won't be for another 3 weeks before we can gauge if the Warrior Shango with the angle is going to do business. I just don't see any big business for Flair vs. Savage, however, no matter what angle they do, which says something about the value of the WWF title as a box office draw in and of itself. April 30th in New Haven saw Crush pin Kato, Martel pin Santana, Nasty Boys beat Owen Hart and Powers, Warrior pinned Shango, Duggan beat Repo Man via DQ, Bret Hart pinned Michaels, and Legion of Doom bat Beverly Brothers. May 4th in Albany, Drew 3000 as Crush pinned Kato 2 stars. Duggan beat Repo Man via DQ dud. Nasty Boys beat Owen Hart and Powers 1 star. Martel pinned Santana 2 stars, Legion of Doom beat Beverly Brothers 2 stars, Bret Hart pinned Michaels 3 stars and Warrior pinned Shango in 4 minutes -1 1/4 stars. The Flair Savage shows drew about 1,800 in La Crosse, Y on May 8th, 3rd, 000 in Milwaukee on May 9th and 3rd, 600 in Sioux City, Iowa on May 10th. Apparently the Paul Baumgartner who is the guy being brought forward to discredit Rita Chatterton is the same person who just 2 months ago went to the Columbus, Ohio media and claimed he was Nikolai Volkov's former tag team partner, and was going to sue the WWF for millions because someone injected him with what he claimed was a steroid and he suffered all these side effects. Some people work their angles within the framework of the fantasy side of the business, and some people can only work angles and live reality like it's fantasy. WCW. Center Stage drew a packed house of 850, all free, on May 11th for WCW Saturday night tapings. They taped 3 shows. First show, which airs on May 23rd, has Dave Casper, the former Oakland Raiders tight end, as guest host. They have a brawl where Ricky Steamboat jumps into it with Arnold Anderson, Bobby Eaton and Larry Zbyszko all at once, and Barry Windham, Dustin Rhodes and Nikita Koloff come out for the save, and it winds up with Steamboat pulling down Paul E. Dangerously's pants. Steve Williams and Terry Gordy debut on that show and were a destruction machine on the jobbers. Steiner's had a great squash beating Tracy Smothers, and Richard Morton, Super Invader, Hercules, won a handicap match. Ron Simmons pinned TaylorMade Man when Greg Valentine's interference backfired, and in a 2.5 stars best of 3 fall match, Koloff and Steamboat and Rhodes beat Eaton and Anderson and Zbyszko when Koloff pinned Anderson in the 3rd fall after Anderson and Zbyszko had a mix-up and they argued after the match. The Faces didn't lose a clean fall as the 2nd fall saw Rhodes get DQ'd after Steamboat pinned Zbyszko in the 1st fall. Went about 23 minutes. Show, which airs May 30th, has Ricky Rackman of MTV headbanging fame as guest host. TV main saw Great Muta win 2 straight falls from Brad Armstrong in 18 minutes. Crowd was split in cheering for the two of them. Started slow, but the last few minutes were great. Final show for June 6th as Dangerously as guest host. Lee Haney was scheduled but no showed. Missy and Medusa wound up arguing to build up to their bikini showdown, which is June 20th. Medusa took off her jacket to reveal a fishnet one-piece suit and Missy got mad and started taking off her clothes, but Doug Dillinger hauled her off. Lightning Kid Sean Waltman had a tryout match and looked tremendous, so I'm told. Steve Beverly is being taken off the 900 line and being replaced by Diamond Dallas Page. Beverly's Tuesday segment consistently drew the 3rd most calls, behind Jim Ross and Missy Hyatt, who have quite an advantage of constantly plugging the line on the weekend shows, almost every week, without any television push, which says something since he beat out both Sting and Lex Luger just about every week when they were the top 2 faces in the promotion. The company wants only its own people on the hotline. World Championship Wrestling on May 2nd drew a 2.2 rating for the Jason Hervey Show. Main Event on May 3rd drew a 2.4 and Power Hour on May 2nd drew a 1.9. Expect Jake Roberts to be introduced at the June 16th Clash, although it could be as a surprise at one of the pay-per-view shows. May 8th in St. Joseph, Missouri drew 1,700 as Big Josh pinned Richard Morton. Van Hammer, in his first tour since returning from rehab, pinned JT Southern. Health Food Dog pinned Mr. Hughes. Ron Simmons pinned Cactus Jack. Nikita Koloff and Great Muta, KG Muto, beat Big Van Vader and Rick Rude via DQ and Harley Race interfere. TaylorMade Man and Valentine beat Tom Zank and Marcus Bagwell. Steamboat pinned Austin and Steiners beat Arnold Anderson and Bobby Eaton. May 9th in Kansas City drew 1,800 as Hammer pinned Southern. These matches are said to be in the 5 star range. Josh pinned Morton, Koloff beat Vader via DQ. Muto pinned Hughes. Austin and Cactus Jack beat Simmons and JYD. Taylor and Valentine beat Senk and Bagwell. Steamboat beat Rude via DQ and Steiners beat Anderson and Eaton. May 10th at the Omni in Atlanta drew approximately 1,100 paid, which was one of the smallest paid attendances for a wrestling event ever at the Omni, which covers an awful lot of events and an awful lot of years. Since Bob Dhue runs the Omni, the surprise move of bringing in Watts may easily be tied to this show not drawing, along with the fact shows haven't been drawing well for a long time. Nevertheless, it was a good house show. Results saw Freebirds beat Smothers and Morton dud, Hammer pinned Southern in 35 seconds dud, Valentine drew Brian Pillman over 10 minutes 1 star, Rude pinned Steamboat in 20 minutes of a no DQ match when Rude hit Steamboat with a ring bell after 2 refs are KO'd and Steamboat cuts off attempts at interference by both Dangerously and Medusa 3 3/4 stars. Simmons and JYD DDQ Cactus Jack and Abdullah the Butcher 1 1/4 stars. Johnny B. Bad pinned Scotty Flamingo 1 1/2 star. Koloff pinned Vader with a finish where Race and Sting both went at it and Vader ended up tripping over Race and getting pinned 2 1/2 star. And Muto and Rhodes and Wyndham beat Anderson and Eaton and Austin when Muto pinned Eaton with a moonsault. Muto is said to be the most over wrestler by the few who attended. 3 1/2 stars. If you look closely during the tag team tournament press conference, you'll notice one of the mics has a WWF logo on it. I believe that Mr. Hughes and Richard Morton were both given notice then when their current guaranteed money contracts expire that they won't be renewed, although WCW will book both of them on a nightly basis when needed. The readers' pages. Dave Prozik of Lisle, Illinois is interested in obtaining videos of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, 1990 Portland shows old Stampede wrestling tapes, 1987-88 After Mags, 1989 issues of Matwatch and Wrestling Observer and pre-1990 Observer and Torch Annual. Bobby Yates of Asheboro, NC is looking for tapes of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Sam Knorr of Walnut Creek, California is looking for quality posters of Japanese wrestlers. Jason Shepard writes to inform us he's discontinuing his Wrestling Weekly newsletter. Steve Beverly of Jackson, Tennessee has a 100-page final Matwatch annual available for $13. A lot of people will find this booklet a most intriguing read, and there are only a few dozen copies left. Greg Berriel of Cochran, Georgia is looking for a tape of the Donahue, Now It Can Be Told and Larry King shows covering the WWF scandals, and also for tapes of an Out on Manhattan public access cable. Gary Waugh of Salina, Kansas is selling tapes of Sunflower State Wrestling live shows for $13 each or 2 cards for $20, and has photos of all SSW wrestlers for $1 apiece and 50 cents postage per order. He's looking for photos of Magnificent Mimi, Fallen Angel, Missy Hyatt, Medusa, Keiji Muto, and Jushin Liger. Prime Minister Film and Videotape Company of Fort Lauderdale, Florida 33305 has tons of nostalgia tapes from around the U.S. from the 1950s to 1980s for sale. Any Observer reader that orders is entitled to a $10 discount, a free old television show, on their first purchase. Joseph Gianninoto of Mount Vernon, New York is looking for a regular correspondent in Japan. Ron Ratner of Brooklyn, New York is looking for complete 1-hour television shows from the WWF from 1977-83 and Championship Wrestling from Florida from 1978-82. Steroids. I saw the 2020 Beast on Steroids and I thought they did a nice job. I feel the WWF ducked what could have been a major bomb. Hulk Hogan was smart not to go on camera on the show because he'd do himself no good. I can't begin to imagine what would happen if a Mike Wallace would get on the trail of Vince McMahon or Hogan. Adam Kane. Farmington Hills, Michigan. Now that everything is out in the open, Hulk Hogan is looking like the fall guy on the steroid issue. I can't find any reason for someone like Joe Weider not being investigated. What is stopping the press from blowing the cover off of bodybuilding? What are other countries doing about steroids? Does Japan have any policy or testing? The one thing that keeps going over in my mind is that there will be a new drug to take the place of steroids that will have the same effect as steroids. This is something that may go on and on and on. A new drug and a different one, and so on. I want to know more about the history of steroids to fully understand it. Where does it come from? Who invented it? Does it have any good usage and can doctors help patients with it like HGH? How long does it take for it to flush out of a person's body? Larry Zala. Sandoval, Illinois. Response from Dave Meltzer, the fall guy on the steroid issue is Ben Johnson, not Hulk Hogan. If anything, when you weight the benefits against the negatives in regards to Hogan's alleged use of steroids, he's still come out way ahead. There are plenty of excellent books on the subject that go into the history of the subject in detail. One of the best is by Dr. William Taylor called Macho Madness, The history of the anabolic steroid epidemic. Laws in regards to steroids vary by country. Canada is probably the strictest, yet the CFL is reputed to be a heavy drug league. The laws in Japan are more lenient than in the US, but use is nowhere close to this country, probably because there is a far less cultural emphasis on physical vanity. Laws in Europe are Mexico more lax than the United States, and a lot of black market steroids are imported from those places. Actually, I've in some ways oversimplified things in this newsletter referring to drugs as steroids, since there are dozens of different drugs with various properties that have different positive and negative effects all under the same heading. New steroids are constantly being invented, with the current tests then having to catch up and come up with ways to detect newer drugs. Athletes on the cutting edge of steroid information will always be a step ahead of the testers, which is why when the issue isn't dealt with honestly and testing is talked of as a cure, it's more public relations than an honest attempt to curtail the problem. Testosterone was reportedly first used in Nazi Germany in the late 1930s, given to soldiers to increase their aggressiveness. For most reports, the most famous heavy steroid abuser of all time wasn't Arnold Schwarzenegger, but Adolf Hitler, and some have blamed his mental state in his later years to a form of steroid psychosis. It is believed that the first country to use steroids as part of training in international sports competition was the Soviet Union for its weightlifters in the 1950s. After the Soviets blew away the Americans in weightlifting in the 1956 Olympics, John Ziegler, the doctor for the U.S. weightlifting team, found out from a Soviet coach about the miracle drug they were using, and he, in conjunction with Siebel Laboratories, developed Anabolic, which was the first steroid introduced to the U.S. by the early 1960s. Use had spread from the lifters to football players to bodybuilders, although use didn't become plentiful in other sports until many years later, and it didn't become epidemic. An estimated 1 million plus users in the U.S., nearly half teenagers, as a recreational drug until the past few years. It takes different times for different forms of steroids to clear the system, ranging from supposedly as short as 8 hours to possibly as long as 6 to 9 months. Steroids have many positive medical benefits, particularly in rebuilding muscle tissue in anorexic individuals, treatment of anemia, breast cancer, and muscle diseases. With the return of the Ultimate Warrior and the WWF's obvious plan to build the promotion around SID Justice and Lex Luger, I'd say the WWF is definitely 100% serious about being steroid-free sports entertainment. Joe Janey, Revere, Massachusetts. Racism. Obviously there is merit to what Jason Jones wrote in the March 30th Observer. Everything hasn't been and still isn't fair to black athletes in pro wrestling. However, his valid points were diminished by his personal bias and presentation. For example, he stated all blacks in wrestling are tokens and white promoters make all black characters look stupid. Ron Simmons is not made to look stupid. His character has a lot of dignity and respect. He's made out to be what he is, an exceptional athlete. Yes, there should be more like him in this business. JYD already gets better treatment than Marcus Bagwell, and Bagwell is already a better worker than JYD. Does anyone believe Rocky King deserved any kind of a push with WCW? Thunderbolt Patterson? Mr. Hughes? As bad as Vince McMahon is, and he is, I'd say he's a lot more guilty of poor taste in general and just doesn't give a damn more than he is racist. The Gulf War angle, Coffin angle, and his treatment of women have nothing to do with racism. Greg Miller. Hayersville, Ontario. Jason Jones made some valid points in his letter in the March 30th Observer about racism in wrestling. However, he made a statement which destroyed any and all credibility. None of your white faithful readers listed Doom for Tag Team of the Year. I'm always amazed when people cry racism in one statement and then make racist comments in the next statement. I'm white and definitely a faithful Observer reader. I'm incensed that someone who cries racism could make a statement like that. Everyone who didn't vote for Doom for Tag Team of the Year is racist. How ridiculous. In no way did they deserve the Tag Team of the Year award this year or in 1990. They were a solid team and complemented each other's ability. They placed 5th in the 1990 voting, and that position was probably too high when compared with teams that only received honorable mentions like Steve Williams and Terry Gordy, and Mitsuharu Misawa and Toshiaki Kawada, both teams of which were light years better than Doom in 1990. And wasn't Doom the NWA World Tag Team Champions, and they didn't have a black booker with WCW at the time. Also, Jones failed to point out the hiring of Corey Macklin by Jarrett to do the color on the USW at television shows. Charles Warburton. Staten Island, New York. Jason Jones bemoaned the state of minorities in wrestling and openly attacked Observer readers for whining about how faithful white readers didn't vote for Doom as Tag Team of the Year, and declared that if you are open-minded you can understand these are stereotypes that whites have placed on minorities for years. That bitter statement obviously opens up a whole other can of worms, but the Observer is not a place to discuss social issues. Jones overlooks one basic fact in his diatribe on why promoters push white wrestlers. It's what the American public wants to see.
It's unfortunate, but most wrestling fans are middle-class white suburbanites with the disposable income to fill the new arenas.
As a result, these fans want to see Aryan men like Hulk Hogan and Sting on top. This doesn't justify the promoters' actions. After all, promoters can certainly set the agenda for what fans see. But wrestling promoters can't even spell the word ethics, so don't hold your breath waiting for it. In addition, the world of pro wrestling isn't corporate America where affirmative action programs are the rule. Even if promoters pushed black stars, it wouldn't change the racist ideas that sadly pervade the country. Racism is a way of life and wrestling isn't going to change it.
Why was Hulk Hogan vs. Zeus so effective?
Because the closet racists which ran rampant in our society loved to watch a blonde white guy pulverize a black monster. As sorry as that sounds, it is also the truth. A final point might be made to look at another large base of the wrestling audience: trashy whites who aren't sensitive to offensive stereotypes because they haven't received enough education.
Promoters often cater to these feeble-minded types because they think it puts butts in the seat.
Eric Kroll. DeKalb, Illinois. Response from Dave Meltzer: while there is validity to a lot of this, the good promoters are the ones who can sell almost whatever they want to the public. The bad promoters are the ones who can't even sell good attractions to the public. The success of Hogan vs. Zeus was based on racial stereotypes in that the white public does fear large black men as monsters, and wanted to see the white guy beat him. If anyone says that Zeus' skin color didn't have anything to do with the success of that angle, they are dead wrong. It was just a late 1980s adaptation of Ernie Ladd as a heel, but made to be even more of a monster since Ladd was portrayed as a realistic person. Ladd was such a big draw in the early 1970s when he played heel because wrestling fans were fearful of a huge black man and therefore badly wanted to see him beaten up, which translated into box office. On the other hand, when pro wrestling attendance and television ratings were much higher than they are today, there was a huge minority audience that came to cheer on ethnic heroes who filled arenas with a lot more frequency than anyone can today, whether it be Bruno Sammartino, Pedro Morales, Mel Mascara, Junkyard Dog, Eduardo Carpentier, Crusher or Bobo Brazil, and so many others. Some of whom admittedly played stereotypical roles but others who really didn't. Times have changed, but the argument that whites on top is what the American public wants to see as a rule is giving the public a lot less credit than they deserve, even with the admission that racism exists. The most successfully marketed athlete of today with the white audience is Michael Jordan, and Magic Johnson would be right with him if he hadn't been stricken with HIV. The Cosby Show, which was the most popular sitcom in history. Black characters played non-stereotypical roles and it got over bigger with the mainstream public than any pro wrestling angle in history, or even classic all-white cast comedy shows of the past that were of every bit as good if not of a higher quality. Many shows with black lead stars beat the pants off of shows in the same time slot that star whites, and the same works vice versa. The reason isn't that the public would rather see blacks, or the reverse, but that they were in some ways more marketable television shows, and race with the general public when it comes to entertainment isn't any kind of an all-pervading issue.
There isn't a black wrestler today who can or would be able to equal the overall popularity of Hogan, but to say Aryan stars are the secret in filling up suburban arenas doesn't hold true because promoters have been having problems for the past few years in filling up suburban, urban and rural arena. If you started today with an ultra-talented and charismatic black man today and decided to push him as the superstar of your company to peak in 1995 and had a less charismatic white man, to say the white man would be a more successful draw than the black man because of the white middle class that supports wrestling is possible, but very debatable, completely unproven and unprovable unless one tries. Since nobody is trying, the lack of an example of such doesn't prove anything. I just want to comment on Jason Jones's letter in the March 30th Observer. I agree racism is an untouched peculiar institution of the pro wrestling business, but I think the root of the problem is the goals of the booker. While many foreign bookers seem to book wrestlers based on inherent talent, U.S. promoters book based on gimmicks, and stereotypes are a convenient way to give wrestlers gimmicks. Black wrestlers can be badass thugs, Bad News Brown or Mr. Hughes, sidekicks to white stars, Ron Simmons, lackeys, Virgil or demented morons, JYD. Even putting black wrestlers over doesn't go without reciprocation. Anyone notice at SummerSlam when Ted DiBiase pinned Virgil cleanly during the ref bump? What did this tell the audience? It says those in control can't comprehend the concept of equality. Jason Tan. Washington, D.C. Response from Dave Meltzer: you had me going there until the last statement. Booking a gimmicked finish to keep the heel doing the job looking strong in a way which added more excitement to the match is not racist.